Okay. Good noon, everyone. Welcome to our special forum, weekly special forum, which is Wednesday forum. And for our friends who join on YouTube, welcome also. I hope you get the best quality of audio and visual from online engagement. Today we will discuss about money, about who pay for ecological sustainability. The answer is must be every one of us. That's the very basic answer. But how this basic answer expanded into more details analysis, exposition will be discussed by our dearest professor, Padiki Sofia. Before going further, I will read his curriculum vitae, which is very long. It took 50 pages. No?
This is the short version.
Or the short version. I will only say briefly. So, current employment, I don't know, is he employed or he's the boss? Let's dive into that further. So he's now interreligious studies faculty here on Gajah Mada University, and also vice president of Geneva-based Globe Ethics, Switzerland, founder and president of the board Yayasan Dharma Etika Madani (YADEMA), founder and president of the board Yayasan Kemitraan Akademik dan Kemanusiaan, CEO. Oh, so he's the one who fit to speak about money, because he is CEO, designer, and curator for Langgaran Eco Village in Patuk, Gunung Kidul, who's recently become recognized by UNESCO. Yes, and another title which is I cannot read because it is so long. So Padiki, give us your insight, and personally, I hope you can delve into the tricky question about the relationship between money, faith-based ecology, and greenwashing. Thank you, Padiki. I know maybe that's new, but I still think it place and floor for you, Padiki.
Thank you very much, Mas Asri. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Peace and blessings be upon you all. Thank you very much for coming. I appreciate we have a lot of popularians here in the room. So thank you very much for all of the students and faculty members who are present here. This work which I will present is actually a work in progress. But Asri and I actually started this in late 2004 and sort of finished in mid 2005. So this was directly related to a work which was entrusted on us by PI. I don't know whether any of you have heard of this organization. This is the International Partnership for Religion and Sustainable Development. So it's based in Europe, mostly in Germany. Thank you very much. Yeah. And so the question I have, looking at the body of literature, looking at the body of knowledge on faith and ecology, you sort of get the idea that much of the talk and discussion about religion and ecology is mostly on sort of doctrinal level, the teachings and the scriptural reasoning, if you like, and the basis of how religious people think about their religion ecologically, or how they see themselves as religious people playing a role in caring for the planet. So that's the sort of mainstream body of knowledge and literature on faith and ecology and sustainability to a certain extent. But the question is, who actually pays for all of this? We know that there's a lot of funding going to climate change, going to sustainability, going to ecology. But when it comes to faith, religion, spirituality, and ecology, conservation, sustainability, climate change, who pays? Who's footing the bill? Who's in charge of the fundraising, the resource mobilization? So that was the sort of general idea of this study. So when I discussed this project with PARD, together with a joint learning initiative based in the US, I said, you know, one of the things that have yet to be discussed and expounded upon is this idea about sustainable financing in faith and ecology. And so that I thought was the sort of frontier knowledge that we need to think about and consider as a sort of a new frontier in research on faith and ecology. And so this is the structure of my presentation. But we will also help with the Ministry of Religious Affairs. And so they are part of the PARD movement. So PARD is essentially this consortium of governments, of NGOs, of religious organizations who are committed to essentially religion and development. And basically, when we first talked about this project, and this was mid-2024, we were sort of toying with the idea of, you know, how should we sort of mold this study so that it could be beneficial, so that it can be quote unquote strategic. Yeah. So this was during the time when the International Partnership for Religion and Sustainable Development was trying to develop its strategic plans for the next 5 years or so. And so they had something like food security, health, public health, and then one of them was also faith and ecology. And they were already planning by February 2025 that they would have and convene what's called the leadership meeting of PARD in Jakarta, hosted by the Ministry of Religious Affairs. And so there in PARD, we also had the German government and also GTZ. We previously had USAID as well, and the Canadian International Agency for Development, and a number of other significant organizations. Yeah. So this is the problem which I had earlier articulated. And the idea is to also think about the different financial mechanisms and structures that are out there ready to be deployed when and where necessary. But one of the things that the PARD people also requested was that we focus on Islam. Yeah, because Indonesia is obviously the largest Muslim populated country, although nowadays it's being challenged by Pakistan, I heard. Yeah. Maybe they have an extra 10 million or 20 million now of their rising birth rate and all. But so this is the problem that I've been thinking about. I mean, I also previously worked in the donor community in the international development agencies. And so, you know, funding is always an issue. Yeah. Because we need to put what we call dollars and cents in all of our projects and initiatives, because everything costs money. Right? So for you guys to come here at 1 o'clock on a Wednesday, I mean, it says something about your commitment, right? But it also says something about your investments that you put in to this activity, right? So every activity costs money. And we know this. We need to fully be aware of this. And what's interesting to me is, when we read the Quran, for instance, when we read the scripture, when it comes to serious matters, when it comes to jihad, struggling and striving to achieve a noble end, or even in the context of sabil, war, the Quran always talks about the sacrifice for wealth and lives. So wealth is always preceding or precedes the lives. Yeah. So yeah, the amwal. So with their wealth and with your wealth, and then comes your lives, their lives. And so this is a prototypical sort of Quranic injunction when we talk about sacrifice. Because the argument is not to say that material wealth, possession, assets are more important than lives, but it is to say that when it comes to wealth, possession, and asset, those kind of things oftentimes can test your mind. Faith. Secondly, the idea is that not that wealth, possession, assets are more important than life, but that it provides more opportunity for people to contribute for the good of society, as opposed to giving up your lives or giving your whole physical exertion to a certain project or initiative. So to me, this seems to be an entry point in understanding the sort of Muslim worldview and mindset when it comes to sacrifice, when it comes to investing in ecological sustainability. So one of the things that was mentioned was that this project would be part of what they call strategic religious engagement. Yeah. And of course, this whole idea about SRE actually originated from the discussions among the academics and the so-called policy wonkers, as they would call it probably, in Washington, D.C., about how the US, most notably, can engage religion, religious groups and movements to push for the agenda for aid development. Yeah. I think I mentioned in my classes and in my previous Wednesday forums that the US State Department had started this conversation about religion and foreign policy as of 2011, because they saw that there was a need for US diplomats around the world, especially when they're dealing with the global South, in places like Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, Southeast Asia, that when you talk about development, when you engage in development, you cannot ignore religion or the religious groups. And so this was the initial sort of thinking. But this strategic religious engagement idea has been sort of made into more sophisticated thinking. Yeah? And there is actually one specific sort of journal, special edition journal in 2021 by the Review of Faith and International Affairs, looking specifically at strategic religious engagement. Yeah, and this was started by people like Chris Seibel, Catherine Marshall, Azataron, and many others who have been working in the field of religion and development. Some years back, I remember I was teaching religion and development here in IRS, and I invited Catherine Marshall to also teach in that class. And so the idea of strategic religious engagement, this was actually based on what they call the Evidence Summit on Strategic Religious Engagement by USAID, by CSIS, by USIP, this is the US Institute for Peace, and also the Templeton Trust Foundation. Yeah, and so these are some of the arguments being put forward on strategic religious engagement. One is this nexus between religion and development, and the evidence is oftentimes lopsided. It's much more gearing toward the English-speaking world, yeah. And then this idea about neutrality in foreign policy in aid giving in development. This is one of the bones of contention. Why do we have to be neutral when it comes to providing aid or granting grants for development projects? Why cannot not be based on our religious affiliations or our faith, for instance? Yeah, I mean, we have also Christian, Catholic development agencies, Islamic humanitarian agencies and organizations, so on and so forth. Isaac Alan talks about this sin of omission because of this sort of lack of democratic principle in the use of language and the use of cultural perspectives when looking at development and aid to the global south, most notably. But Wilkinson talks about enhancing public participation and legitimacy. Yeah. So when you come to a country like Indonesia and you have a development project and you have a humanitarian assistance project, for instance, it's really hard to ignore the Nahdlatul Ulama. It's really hard to ignore the Muhammadiyah, right? It's really hard to ignore the religious communities, the PGI, the KWI, and all of the other religious organizations and movements, right? But this is where Wilkinson argues that you can be more strategic because then you can have greater buy-in from the citizenry and buy-in from the participants themselves instead of them feeling that they are being steered by the foreign development agencies. Mandeville talks about religion and development and diplomacy and trying to right-size religion, meaning to say, to what extent should religion be in the consideration for aid giving and development or humanitarian assistance? But of course, now with Donald Trump 2.0, we have seen the destruction of the USAID and this war against wokeism and DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yeah. So they want nothing to do with gender equality, LGBTIQ rights. Even the term social justice has become somewhat politicized now.
You cannot use the word social justice in a National Science Foundation proposal.
Exactly. You see? Thank you very much for pointing that out. So we are in this stage now. So this occurred before Donald Trump 2.0, right? So we are now living in this period where everything seems to be beautiful, according to Trump, but very not beautiful according to millions of other people. Yeah, so there was also, this is the leadership of the pod, and we met the minister, who obviously was just appointed as Minister of Religious Affairs, but of course he was also the Grand Imam of the Istiqlal Mosque. And here we have the evidence-based workshop that we, Asri and I, convened in Ancol. And so this was to get together the partners, the actors, and the stakeholders together in one room and to discuss avenues for cooperation, collaboration, and potential initiatives together. And so we had people from religious communities, we had NGOs, we had people representing the embassies, and we also had people representing the donor community. Yeah. We also interviewed, how many people did we interview? Maybe almost 30.
Yes.
Yeah, 30 people from these different segments in society to really think through about how we can think about sustainable financing. And of course, not many people realize this. For instance, during the COVID-19 pandemic, Muhammadiyah, which is, of course, the largest religious organization movement in Indonesia, if not the world, and now considered as the fourth richest religious organization in the world. They contributed to at least 1.3 billion US dollars to the COVID-19 pandemic mitigation. I mean, that's the extent of the potential of financing development or humanitarian assistance via religious organizations. And oftentimes these kinds of information and ideas don't come to mind when we think about faith and ecology, or even when we think about faith, ecology, sustainability, and climate action, for instance. And so this was a period of the formative research. We call it formative research because this was also to see the facts on the ground and to see the potential partners, actors, and stakeholders who might want to work with development agencies from Europe, from the US, and others. Yeah. But again, they wanted to emphasize that we focus more on Islam or on the Muslim community. So in that context, of course, we have our constitution, our laws, and then our ministry, or one of the most powerful ministries, I would argue, is the Ministry of Religious Affairs. It used to be number 4 in terms of the budget allocation. I think they're number 6 or 7 now. But then also the challenge of linking many of these projects and initiatives with other line ministries, like the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Forestry, which are now combined, and then many other, including the Ministry of Finance, for instance, who would provide the legal basis for any kinds of establishment of new financial mechanisms. But then we also have the religious schools, the higher education institutions, the pesantren, the mosques, and other kinds of religious institutions, which may have their own sustainable financing, which we don't realize. Yeah. Because when we talk to the former director of the Pele pesantren, for instance, Professor Dr. Waryono, who used to be a professor at Islamic University here, and he is now, I think, the director for Zakat, Infaq, Sadaqah, and Waqf and endowments. But he was previously the director of Pendidikan Dinia, religious education, and Pondok Pesantren. And one of their main programs is to develop eco-pesantrens. And he was saying that I want all of the 49,000 pesantrens in Indonesia to be eco-pesantrens. At least that's his dream, that's his aspiration. I can talk a little bit about our own project on eco-pesantren, where we looked at 50 pesantrens in Indonesia, so 30 in Java and 20 in Sumatra. And we developed this dashboard technological platform to see the development of the eco-pesantrens and the kinds of systems and installations that they have developed throughout the years. But this is also within the context of our current state of civil society in Indonesia. People have been arguing, scholars have been arguing that the civil society is shrinking. And some people have argued that it's not the civil society that is shrinking, it's the public sphere that is shrinking. But either way, public deliberation and activism has gone down. And one of the reasons for that is because now Indonesia has become a middle income country. Yeah. And that much of the foreign aid or development assistance has gone to either Africa or now with Donald Trump 2.0 in preparation for World War III. But we have strong modalities. Indonesia is considered as one of the most religious societies in the world, according to Pew Survey research. Indonesia is also considered as the most charitable nation, for the past maybe 7 to 8 years, according not to an Indonesian organization, but by the Charities Aid Foundation, based in the UK and the US. So they base the data survey on a couple of things. One is the Indonesian people's desire to give, to donate to charity. And then also, secondly, to help others in times of need. I guess this is where gotong royong comes in. Yeah. But we have become, carrying this title as the most charitable nation for the past 7 to 8 years now. And now with the recent global flourishing studies done by Harvard, Baylor University, and Gallup poll, Indonesia now is considered as the most flourishing nation. Yeah. They looked at 22 countries. Number 1 was Indonesia. Number 2 was Mexico, surprisingly. Number 3 was Philippines. You know what number 22 is? The UK. Number 21 is Turkey, and number 20 is Japan. Surprisingly. Wow. But the problem was that our president Prabowo, he translated this study and said Indonesia is the happiest nation on earth. There's a very stark difference between happiness and flourishing. And I've talked about this during the conferences in Rome with Notre Dame University, with Australian Catholic University, and also Indonesia University in Japan. Because they have different categories. And one among the 6 is obviously has to do with materiality or material possession. But their articulation about material possession is not so much how much money do you have, but in terms of material or income stability. That we have. So although our finances are, our income is very low, but it's stable, alhamdulillah. And that contributes to flourishing. Yeah. There's also meaning and purpose in life, which is one of the categories of this global flourishing studies. And I guess, considering Indonesia, Mexico, Philippines are highly religious societies with 87% Muslims and maybe 78% Roman Catholics in Mexico, and maybe how many Roman Catholics in the Philippines? Maybe 89%, 90%. Yeah. So maybe that also contributes to this idea about meaning and purpose in life. Because unknowingly, or this sense of meaninglessness and purposelessness in life does contribute to non-flourishing. In fact, it contributes highly to suicide. And so, if you look at the national context, you look at the laws now, after the 4th Amendment of the Constitution, we do have the wordings in terms of sustainability and environmentally sound projects and programs by the government. So these are, as you know, merely words. Yeah? And words oftentimes do not necessarily translate into policies and actions. Yeah. But if you look at the international context, now this is quite interesting. You look at the declaration by ICESCO. So ICESCO is this collection of ministers of economic and the environment from the OIC, or the Organization of Islamic Countries. They put out a statement on the 4th of October 2019, saying essentially that zakat, infaq, sadaqah could be used for sustainable development goals. And this has never been done before. I mean, no fatwas of anybody, including the Indonesian Council of Ulama, for instance, could ever do this. Yeah. So there is a new thinking about the functions of zakat, infaq, sadaqah, and waqf. And to me, this provides a good entry point for all of the Islamic countries to start thinking about different and alternative ways of sustainable financing for the ecology, for the environment. Yeah. Of course, they have yet to include sukuk here, and I can talk about more about sukuk later on, which is the Islamic bonds system, yeah, which is taking off quite well. So to me, this idea about having that nuanced understanding that we should open up, yeah, the idea of the cultural and religious dimension in protecting the environment is something new. Yeah. At least not so much maybe from the Indonesian perspective, but consider the Arab countries in the Middle East, the North African nations who are mostly Muslims. Yeah. So these were some of the activities which I did in the UNFCCC, which is the United Nations Framework on blah 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 climate change. Yeah, in Dubai and in Azerbaijan, and this was specifically sponsored by the Majlis Hukama, or the Muslim Elders Council, which was developed by the OIC, by the ICESCO, essentially to also tell the world that we have a new perspective now. Yeah, that cultural, religious dimensions of ecological sustainability, of looking at the environment, protecting the planet from the perspective of religion. And hence, this is why we push for this agenda of the Faith Pavilion in the COP. And I think this was probably the 12th Faith Pavilion in COP, in the Conference of Parties on Climate Change. And now, together with the World Evangelical Alliance and with Baylor University, we have pushed for a Faith Pavilion in the World Urban Forum, which is usually hosted by UN Habitat. And we will be attending the Faith Pavilion there and shepherding the platform there in Baku, Azerbaijan next month in May. So the world is changing in that sense. Yeah, people are starting to realize, oh, we need to include the religious people in climate action, in trying to mitigate global warming. Yeah, so this is new. Yeah, when we think about the international constellation. In terms of actors, I did say earlier on that we talked to government officials, NGOs, and this is Professor Dr. Waryono, by the way. This was, I think, just after he was appointed as the director for Zakat, Infaq, Sadaqah, and Waqf. Yeah. But basically, we wanted the tacit knowledge and the strategic understanding of the situation and how they can possibly help us think about ways and means to mobilize resources for sustainable financing Maybe some of you know Basnas. Basnas is this agency, the national agency to accumulate the zakat, yeah, in Sadaqah. And so we have a specific agency for that. Yeah. Of course, according to many of the Muslim belief that we don't have to give the money to the government, we can also give it to a local mosque, yeah, or the local committee, or to perhaps directly for some of us to orphanages, for instance, or to our neighbors. But if you feel like you want to be more strategic and you want and you believe and have confidence in the government, then this is the way to do it. You give the money to Basnas, basically. So then they can think about the different ways and means to allocate the funding. Of course, there are very strict regulations, yeah, pertaining or fiqh jurisprudence pertaining to who has the right to receive these monies and who do not have the right. If you remember, I think just 2 weeks ago or something, our current Minister of Religious Affairs and his ministry, they were toying with the idea of using zakat for embedded. And people are saying, are you crazy? Right? Well, for one, MBA is for all of the students, right? So you have the rich, very rich, the not so rich, and the destitute students, obviously, right? But we've seen how the MBA has unfolded. And there would be not much support for the use of zakat in Sadaqah for such a program. Yeah. So again, the government knows what is at their disposal in terms of money, in terms of where to find the pot of money to service the programs and initiatives. But then there are other programs that are quite strategic from our perspective, which combine the forces of the civil society, the religious communities, as well as the government. I mentioned the Eco Sunday project, but then there's also the Green Hajj project. You know, there are around 200,000 Indonesians who goes to Mecca and Medina to conduct the major pilgrimage. That's just a major pilgrimage in a given slot of time, which is about maybe 1.5 months. Yeah. But then there's also the minor pilgrimage. The problem with Hajj is that everyone is carrying a bottle of water. Right? So if you have like 3 million people in one city, in one vicinity, and all carrying water bottles, you can just imagine the chaos and the hell that they are creating in Mecca and Medina. And we've seen some of these pictures of mountains of plastic bottles and garbage in the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. And so our good friend, Dr. Fahruddin Mamunjaya from UNAS, for instance, has developed this special app for Green Hajj, whereby pilgrims can then look at the app and be reminded about how one can conduct a greener pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina.
10 minutes.
Yeah, okay. There's also the Green Mosque initiative, yeah, Masjid Hijau. And then what's most, I think, interesting is the Wakaf-based Midi Forest. Yeah, and this has been one of the, I think, hallmarks of religious innovation from the Indonesian Muslim community, and that is to establish this hutan wakaf. One of the problems with hutan wakaf is that, you know, many of our landlords and barons, they can't care less about gazettement or licensing or SHMs and so on. So they just know that my land is from that hill to that hill. Right? And sometimes they don't have any specific certifications on that. Then one day, out of good faith, maybe because he's dying or he wants to, give back to society, then he would say, all of this I will turn into waqf. That has happened many times, numerous occasions. But the problem is the government can't take action or legal action on that simply because the legality of these lands and forests are oftentimes questioned. Yeah. That's why the government and specifically the Minister of Religious Affairs says, if you want to do waqf for your land for any types of purposes, religious purposes, then please make sure that you do have the certification, the formal legal certifications. Without that, the government would be at loss in terms of how they can manage and even secure your waqf or your endowed land, your endowed forests. Yeah. And then you have the green sukuk. Yeah. What's interesting is that when we spoke to one of the leaders of this is the Komisi Economy Islam Indonesia. Yeah. So the National Commission for the Islamic Sharia, essentially. And so she was saying that there's a lot of youth buying up green sukuk. There's at least like 1.5 million youths buying sukuk. Although they're not buying in billions or millions. I mean, some of them buy green sukuk in the amount of maybe 500,000, 500,000, 800,000, 1 million or 1.5 million. Which signals to us that this is a new and brilliant, again, innovation, in which we can use and facilitate and mobilize the resources of the religious people and their commitment to caring for the planet. And we've seen an increased amount of the income generated through these green sukuks. These are just the fatwas or the fatwa that have been produced by MUE since I think 1983. But this is one of the reasons why a lot of Muslim scholars around the world on faith and ecology have said that when it comes to Islamic ecology, Indonesia is at the forefront. In fact, Iyad, who used to be the director for the United Nations Environmental Program, who you saw in the picture after my speech there in the Faith Pavilion, he was saying, look, Indonesia has like 7 or 8 fatwas on the environment. I mean, to him, that is inconceivable. I mean, you would not find the religious scholars, the ulama in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, or in even, I would imagine, in Egypt as well, to come up with some of these fatwas. Maybe I'll just, I think I'm missing some. Anyways, I have some of these quotes, and you can actually find my report online, so you can download them. Just go to Google and search for Dickersoft card or strategic religious engagement, or just Dickersoft and strategic religious engagement PDF, and then you'll find the document easily enough. But these are some of the things, some of the sentiments coming out from many of our informants. This is Tata Mustasha, who's a good friend of mine. He was working for Greenpeace, and Greenpeace Middle East, North Africa used to consult with me as well for their strategic communications on Islam and ecology. And so he had a very interesting argument to say that when it comes to Amr al-Ma'ruf, it's easier to propagate that as opposed to Nahy al-Munkar, or the prevention of bad and evil. This is just to give you quickly the idea of the modality I was talking to you about. And of course, we're talking about the total national budget allocation for the Ministry of Religious Affairs, and it comes to almost 80 trillion, yeah, which is equal to 4.8 billion for 1 year. Of course, you must consider that at least 60% of this would go to state employees, yeah. But as you can see, much of the programming goes to the Islamic guidance, yeah, community, yeah. And it's also there and in the Islamic education that you have the pasantrens and you have the masjids and you have the other the Islamic schools and universities which are under there. So their idea is how do you make all of the Islamic schools, universities, the madrasas, the pasantrens, the universities to be all environmentally friendly campuses. I mean, imagine having a government official at the national level having that kind of vision. Yeah, I mean, plus the mosque. How many mosques do we have in Indonesia? We have around 800,000 mosques. Yeah, imagine all of these mosques turning into eco mosques, and all of the 49,000 santrens all becoming eco santrens. Yeah? These are just some of the figures that we came up with in terms of the state of affairs regarding Basnas. Their target had been for 2025 to accumulate at least 50 trillion, which is 2.9 billion. But in the first semester of 2025, they've only received 26 trillion. So, and one of the reasons why we don't have yet the semester 2 is that it's all being still accounted for by the auditors. That's why these kinds of reports oftentimes are very late. When you think about the, this is the philanthropy, the Wakaf-based forestry program. And this is done by the Lowy Institute. So they did a specific study on one, how much is needed for Indonesia to fulfill its nationally determined targets for the reduction of what do you reduce for climate change? Carbon emission, the carbon reductions. Yeah. So according to their estimates, Indonesia needs at least 281 billion US dollars or 4,225 trillion. But yet they have only reached 10.5 billion. So we are far away from our target in terms of the need to mobilize more sustainable financing for Wakaf-based forestry. The green sukuk, this has been rising, but again, this is just looking at the early stages of development. And mind you, Indonesia has received a lot of awards because of this green sukuk, because of the innovation that is attached to this financial mechanism. Lastly, we also have the World Bank Project. And what's interesting, when we talked about religion, ecology, and sustainable financing, the World Bank officer basically said, you know, Tiki, if you can get the government to tell us to provide funding for religion and ecology, we will do it. Yeah. They even committed money for the indigenous communities in Jambi, yeah, to conserve the forests. And of course, they were saying, of course, they probably have a certain belief system or religious system that they believe in and operate in terms of how they manage and conserve the forest. And so in Jambi alone, they have a $77 million project. And so these are the potential sources of sustainable financing that we can think about and consider all of our projects on faith, ecology, sustainability, and climate action. Just maybe another 3 minutes or so. There's also another looking at it, and that is in terms of project grants. This is the Eco Pesantren project that I was talking to you about. I believe this is Pesantren Pandanaran and that's Al Imdad in Bantul. But basically, it would be great if we can turn 49,000 Pesantrens into Eco Pesantrens. And that's the vision of the former director. And obviously, any sort of means and ways in which we could help them would also be a great thing. The other last point I want to mention is private investment. And for those who have visited my Ecological village, I know, Mark, you've been there twice. I know, Franz Bison, you've been there 3 times. You've been with your son, and I know the Fokolare people went there for the iftar. Mas Iqbal has also gone there with his family. And so private investment and equity, that's also another way to ensure a stream of funding, significant stream of funding for the safeguarding of nature. Why not? Yeah. I mean, I'm just a small baron, a small landlord, but there are many religious philanthropists and religious entrepreneurs who might be interested in doing something like this, right? I mean, I'm just a docent, with a regular salary of a docent, right? And so I cannot possibly afford this. So what do? I invite my friends to invest. And rightly so, I have at least 11, 12 private investors who are investing in the Melandiran Eco Village. Yeah. So buying a plot of land and the wooden villas. So they like the concept. So as long as we can touch their hearts with the aesthetics, with the beauty. One of the reasons I told them why they were convinced, I said, this is my conception of paradise on earth. I said, and I told them, how many times does the Quran speak about paradise? And what is the main characteristic of Al-Jannah in the Quran? At least 5 to 7 times the Quran speaks of the river that flows beneath. Al-Jannatu admin tajri min tahtiha al-anhar. Paradise is where rivers flow beneath. And so this is your paradise on earth. So the irony behind this is, why would you covet, why would you desire for a mythical paradise in the afterlife, and yet at the same time destroy paradise on earth? Thank you very much.
Bisa diambilkan air minum. Terima kasih. Matur nuwun. Okay. Yes. And also for my. Okay. We have several minutes, maybe 30 to 35 minutes for discussion. I would like to hear question, critical assessment from the audience, and also maybe from the YouTube audience, if any. Please, 1, 2, 3 question. Pamar first, and then to Pamar, please.
Vicky, this is very intriguing, and there's obviously a lot of work going into building I guess one would say, a social and political infrastructure at a global level. On your last slide, though, the last couple of slides, you pointed to a really unfortunate lack when we're talking about green walk up or what in Indonesia is perhaps the most critical issue, which is deforestation. And the gap between let's see, what's been raised was 10 billion.
200.
Out of what's needed is 281 billion, and so it seems to me that the critical issue here, other things are really nice and they're really important, but in a way, when we look at effectiveness, they're window dressing, and what really has to be done is to somehow close this financial gap here between a really enormous need and a relatively small amount of money that's currently been raised or allocated.
Thank you. Did you like to directly answer?
So maybe you can collect the question.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Vicky and the friends. My question is rather a pragmatic one. Because I'm just considering, the potential. My question is really the potential for what we might term as interfaith co-financing of certain environmental concerns, common ones, to all faith-based organizations. What was the potential for that? I come from if you allow me a context. I just come back recently from a visit to North Sumatra, where there was the recent ecological disaster there that people were saying before it was natural, but in fact we know that it's man-made and proof of it. And the stories is that on the ground was that after 3 months after and their rehabilitation efforts are still continuing, and there was an effort by the Catholic Church through its organization Caritas, to provide funding to reconstruct the damaged water facilities in among the most damaged areas. And the story is that when they saw the bill, they had to back down. And it's a big disappointment, obviously, for those who are also expecting that from the church and also, I guess, from the government, but which is a bit rather slow in coming. So my question is for common concerns of certain urgency of this kind. An ecological disaster it is right now. Also now you don't find them in the news because maybe of some for some political or reason. But and what are the channels that are actually in place so that we can actually maybe work together among these financing faith-based organizations that are capable of financing such common concerns.
Maybe one more? Anyone? No? Okay. Paligi, please respond to the question, and maybe after that we will have a second session.
Yes, thank you very much, Mark and Paul, for the questions. This is why this is still at the formative stage of research, because, and this is why we are calling it part of the strategic religious engagement. As you saw, that we engage a lot of people from different segments of society, right? From the government, from the NGOs, religious communities, and also entrepreneurs and so on. So, but there's no one organization that talks to everyone. That's the problem, right? There's not one platform that can connect these dots, these people, and their potential resources to think together about faith and ecology. But my argument is to say that, there is that potential. It's just that the awareness is not there. And as you pointed out that, we're not aware of these initiatives. We're not aware of these financial mechanisms or these platforms. And so it's always difficult to sort of combine the argument between faith in ecology, sustainability, and sustainable financing. It's like, where did that come from, right? But that's where the gap lies. I mean, as you saw, this is a gap that we have. And this is based on the need of a nationally predetermined thing that we have to report to the UN every year. Right? So this is a policy that has already been made by the government of Indonesia, the commitment to reduce carbon emissions. But that's the need, and this is where we are right now. So it's a far cry from actually the resources that is at our disposal. You want to say?
Cindy, this is almost going back to your old days at the Nature Conservancy. Years and years ago. But I'm going to use a really concrete, somewhat crass example here. The only way to stop oil palm plantations. We can pass all the regulations and pass all the laws and all that, but the people who own them are very wealthy and powerful people, and they're gonna find a way around it. The only way to really stop them is to buy them out. Right? Yeah. Go in and say, okay, this is 50,000 hectares here, how much do you want for it? And that in a way that doesn't sound very green friendly or something, but it's the only effective way to do it, and it takes a lot of money.
That's why I mentioned the private investment and private equity as being one of the financial mechanism in which we can actually try to sort of lessen this gap, you see, between the needs and where we are in terms of the resources at our disposal. Of course, the Nature Conservancy is an American organization, and their idea is based on obviously liberal capitalistic idea that any form of conservation can be done through land acquisition. So basically, you just buy the land and conserve it. That's how you do it. That's what I'm doing now in Langara, right? So I just purchase the land and I tell all my neighbors that if you chop this tree, it's haram. It will go to hell. And they would listen to me. Because one, I own the place, and secondly, they work for me as a worker, as a laborer, to build the eco-village. So there is that sort of mutual benefit kind of arrangement. But if you went to my eco-village maybe 3 months ago, 4 months ago, the land next to mine, which is 10,000 square meters, that is also being sold. And there's a widow who wants to sell it. And so through a third party, she offered me the land. And I said, how much? Oh, it's 2 million. 7 billion. But for you, Paditi, maybe 6 billion. I said, thank you very much. I'm just a regular docent tetap here in Universitas Gadjah Mada. I don't have those billions of rupiahs. But what happened was that she needed the money for healthcare because she was getting sick. And so the following month, what we saw was people coming in, bringing trucks and chopping down the big trees. So that's the consequence of this inability of me, on my part, to do land acquisition. I mean, I would have loved to buy that land, but not for 6 or 7 billion rupees. I would have to try to find an investment firm or somebody, a true baron, a true landlord who wants to invest there so that we can conserve the place, conserve the forest there. Because it's a beautiful place with a lot of cheap wood trees, a lot of flowers and plants and different kinds of species of birds and butterflies and whatnot. So filling this gap is crucial. But then there's also the idea of that zakat infak sadaqah. What if we were to reconsider about who the people who are eligible to become the Mosaic or the receiver of the religious alms and charity? Because this is the director's argument. You know, we might want to think about the forest, we might want to think about the disasters and everything, right? But first and foremost, we have to feed the 25.2 million poor people. And that's our job. So all of the government policies and programs need to answer to this need first. And obviously this was the policy of Jokowi, not the policy of Prabowo. But for Prabowo, this is answered through the MBG. But his idea, Professor Warino's idea, is how do we turn the Mustahik into the Muzaki? Yeah. So instead of receiving, they should be giving the zakats, the religious alms, the charities, and the donation. So those are all of the challenges. But what I'm saying here is that these are the financial mechanisms that we can use to ensure or to at least increase our potential for sustainable financing. Now, regarding your question about the multi-faith sort of initiative, we have the IRI, the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative, which I have mentioned in my earlier. That is a truly interfaith initiative, which was actually done initially by UNEP, the United Nations Environmental Program. And this is basically to get together people from different faiths to support the lungs of the earth, to support the rainforest in Borneo, in the Congo Basin, and in the Amazon. So that's called IRI, that's called the Interfaith Rain Forest Initiative. And we interviewed one of the Secretary Generals, who is our dear graduate of CRCS, Pendeta Jimmy Sokmin, right, who used to study here and who's planning to also do his PhD here, hopefully, inshallah. But his idea was that how do we get different faith communities to functionally cooperate and work together to save the environment, to save the rainforest? And so they have a financial mechanism right now where you have a company that is taking care of the funds that are supposed to be dispersed for the IRI initiative. I met them in Oxford during our Seoul World Forum conference. But from the information I have is that they don't yet have sufficient funding to ensure sustainable financing for the programs. And so this is one of the unfortunate things. Maybe, but possibly, the reason might be that it's hard for people to imagine, giving money, charity, or zakat for the Congo Basin or for the Amazon. Maybe that's a bridge too far, right? So maybe we need to localize it so that people can. But if one were to think strategically, I mean, the idea in my days in the Nature Conservancy, the idea of conservation is based on this idea about scale, right? So you might have a marine protected area that is as big as this room, for instance, but that's not going to do you any good because that's too little. Yeah, you need a wider area of marine protected areas. You need a wider, land and forest to conserve the birds, for instance, or the wildlife, and the different tree species. Because nature knows no boundaries, right? That's a problem. And so they don't understand species don't understand administrative boundaries, and so they just pass on. They can't differentiate between where is the marine protected areas and where are the non-marine protected areas, where are the conserved forests, yeah, or the hutan rakyat or the hutan sosial, and where are the non-hutan. They don't know, right? So the idea is to just scale up everything, and so you compile the money and purchase the land and buy as big a land as you can. Yeah. So
There are now some very, I think, very effective online fundraising programs by some conservation organizations, and specifically one focusing on African elephants. And I don't know whether very many of you have seen these, and I have no idea why they keep popping up on my Facebook newsfeed. But they're things like cute little baby elephants splashing and playing in the mud and spraying. This kind of stuff raises money quick. Because it doesn't appeal to logic, it doesn't appeal to anything that he's talking about. It appeals 100% flat out to emotion, and it works.
this is the difference between the Nature Conservancy, whose main strategy is ecosystem preservation, and the World Wildlife Fund, which is focused on species-based preservation. That's why you have the black and white panda as its cute logo for WWF, right? Because they focus on species preservation. While the Nature Conservancy thinks in terms of ecosystems, yeah, not species. And so that's one of the problems. And for me, if you think about financing an ecosystem, we already have what's called the total ecosystem value calculations, yeah, where you can actually total up the amount of value of a certain ecosystem. Yeah, let's say if it's a river, then you can account for how much gallons of water that it can produce. And if that were to be monetized, how much would that be? And if there were fish in the river, we can count the fish as well. Some of my staff members in the Nature Conservancy's job is to biologically monitor the fish and actually dive into the ocean and count the fish. With a special notepad that is wrapped around their arms, and they bring a special pen. And they count literally the fish every month. I said, I'm not going to do that. But there are people who do that. And that is to ensure that we know that there's sufficient conservation area for the fish to breed, right? So there's sufficient time for them to congregate and then to produce more of their kind and so on. So yes, if you look at BASNA's website, you will not only see the current state of income generation that the zakat infak sedekah accumulates to them, but you can also see the various categories of allocation. And one allocation which strikes me is allocation called kebencanaan. So this is for disaster, not so much disaster mitigation, but I would imagine disaster humanitarian aid of a sort. So we are always thinking in terms of post factum, right? So after the fact, it's never before the fact. So my idea is, what if we were to have a different category for this, for zakat infak sedekah, for conservation, for disaster mitigation, and not for humanitarian aid during disasters. You know what I'm saying? So we need to rethink our strategies and policies as a whole, I think, in this matter.
Pak Sen, would you like to comment? No? Anyone, please? Okay, if there is no one, okay. Please.
Thanks, Valentin. And thanks also, I know this is a presentation that's not only about the issue, but also something that you're personally invested in and working on. So you're not just studying it, but you're living it. So thank you for being involved on both aspects. As you were talking, especially about the sort of shrinking state in Indonesia and how that's impacting the charitable sector, or in just the levels of poverty, it reminded me of the situation in the UK in 2010 after the financial crisis, when the Conservative government came in and they said, we don't have enough money to fund social services anymore. So we have created this idea of what we call the big society. So the theory was, if we remove state funding, then the charitable sector will come in and fix the problem. But unfortunately, and not surprisingly, that didn't happen. Instead, the levels of poverty increased, the social problems increased, and social conflict came from that increase. So that's a little bit of a depressing context, and I don't think that means that's going to happen in every country. But it just makes me think about, what do you see is the role of civil society and religious institutions in a situation where the state is shrinking and seems to be on that type of trajectory? What can they do, both kind of individually and together, and in the sense, especially when it comes to environmental preservation? And is it a case of filling gaps, or what are they actually able to contribute within the limitations they have? Thank you.
This one. Any other? Another one?
Okay, thank you very much, Jonathan. I don't know in what context you were talking about the state was shrinking. I did mention here that it's a shrinking of the Indonesian civil society, right? So, and the shrinking of the so-called public sphere. And now we have Prabowo as president. It seems like, oh, everyone's like Kopassus nowadays, right? His assistants, his governors, and this and that. And so, and you see this increasing intimidation against civil rights movement activists. But yes, I mean, the question is, I mean, the perennial question in political science is whether big states are good or not, or whether small states are good or not. And I guess this is one of the reasons for the debate between the Republicans and the Democrats in the case of America, right? Because the Democrats always want big government, the Republicans always want small government, hoping that then the businesses, the enterprises, the conglomerates and whatnot would jump in to provide the necessary facilities and amenities for the public. But then we know that the market is distorted. We know that there is this increasing amount of oligarchy happening, including here in Indonesia, right? So people who are stinking rich, filthy rich, who are like less than 1% of the population, right? But who control maybe 50 to 60% of the money and resources in the country. I mean, how could we allow that? Somebody like Elon Musk, for instance. I mean, soon enough he'll become the first trillionaire, I heard, right? And so, how can the society allow that? Right? I thought we have always been thinking, when it comes to income, that the lowest and the highest would not be further than maybe 10 to 15 times more. Yeah. But now we have somebody who does not work so hard, but probably has that talent for innovation and creativity, but simply sort of reaping all of the resources of the world. I mean, you think about the AI techno billionaires, how much energy is used for each and every one of these AI technology in terms of resources, in terms of natural resources, the water usage, the electricity, and so on. Yeah, and so that's not accounted for, right? People are happily using AI, all sorts of AI technologies without realizing that, our natural resources are being taken to sort of support these technologies. And so, if you look at the context of Indonesia, you see a bigger government now. I mean, I don't know how many ministries we have right now under Prabowo. 48, 52? It has almost doubled since Jokowi. We even now have, let's say, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has 3 deputy ministers. Why? For what? Right? I mean, it seems excessive. Because when you appoint a deputy minister, then you have to have a special driver for him, a cook, right? A gardener, kepala rumah tangga, right? And then the helpers. Can you imagine? I mean, the resources that are being laid to bear, for all of these people who have privileges. So when you think about religion and ecology and sustainability, you think that less is more. Yeah. Because you really have to think about what are the things that you actually need in life and not the things that you actually want in life. And to shift that mentality is very difficult. I mean, all of my salaries go to my staff at the Eco Village. And I feel sorry for my wife and for my, but that's how things are. So I have to turn my head around and think of different ways in which I can accumulate money so that my wife and 4 kids would not leave me, for instance. Just for the sake of sustainability. And you might want to ask the question, why am I doing this? You might think that this is a lofty idealism of a sort, but it's also something which might not necessarily be rational. Again, this comes back to my previous work on the hardware of ecological sustainability, that we focus too much on the hardware, which is the scientific, technocratic way of looking at ecological sustainability, and then some others think in terms of the software, which is to look at the legal policy side of things when it comes to ecological conservation. But I focus on the hardware, as in the hati, and how we see ourselves as being the Khalifah fil ard, as being the steward of the earth. I mean, that to me is an important concept, I think, altogether. But to just use that as a discursive tool and not try to practice that in any way, I think would be detrimental or would negatively affect our faith as well, in my opinion. Thank you very much.
And there, finish our discussion today. Thank you, Valiki. Before you say the last sentence, I would like to ask about the theoretical contribution of this session. But since you already mentioned that, I can share my own agenda. Please don't ask me to summarize this. Just you can give me that job. Okay, I would like to invite Mas Iqbal Ahnaf, the head of Department of Evidence, would give Pak Diki Cendramata, our special unique souvenir of this forum. Please, Pak Iqbal.
Thank you, Pak Togi. Great. I look small, yeah?
For the next week, we have Martha about ecology also. Okay, so stay tuned of this forum next week. I hope you can come also. Okay, that's all. Thank you very much. Yes.
Yeah, until the end of this semester, the remaining topic will be on ecology. So, yeah, starting today, we actually designed until the end of the semester, all the topics will be related to ecology from different aspects. Yeah. So it's a thematic series which we are experimenting with. And maybe next semester there will be other themes. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
The theme for the next semester will be comparison and health. Like,